Hi, everyone. Welcome to another interview for the Davis Museum Q20 faculty interviews. Today, I'm with Kathya, who is an assistant professor of art at Wellesley College. She presents selections from West, a photographic project that documents communities in the American West defined by an agricultural economy and a Latinx immigrant population. Influenced by her bicultural upbringing, her work of the past decade focused on Latinx communities and the exploration of history, migration, representation, and belonging. So my name is Gabby, and I'm a junior at Wellesley College, and I'll now give Kathya some time to introduce herself before we jump into the questions.
Hi, well, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Gabby, for taking the time out of your day-to-day to set aside this time to share with me. My name is Kathya Landeros, and I'm a first-year assistant professor here at Wellesley. I teach in the studio or the art department. In the studio side, I teach photography. And thank you for the introduction. As you mentioned, I am a Mexican-American artist. I divided my time between Mexico and the United States growing up. And so a lot of my work has been influenced by that bicultural upbringing. And a lot of my work has focused on Latinx immigrant communities, and primarily in the American West, which was where I was based for a long time.
Right, of course. And I think that's a really great transition to, I think, the first question that I have for you, which is, what did you learn as an undergrad, or what were the experiences, maybe particularly in your early years of schooling or your upbringing, that really still influences your artistic practice today?
So as an undergrad, I was a dual major in Hispanic studies and English literature. So there's a lot of cross-pollination between the arts and the humanities. I think they're really inextricably linked. I was not a photography major or minor as an undergrad, but I loved storytelling and was drawn to the idea that language can preserve memories, that it can express desire and longing, that it can reveal who we are as individuals, or who we are as a society and as a culture. And I think literature also expresses something really universal about the human condition and how interconnected we all are, even if those connections seem tenuous and fraught at times. So studying literature, having that background helped me understand how visual language can function similarly to the richness of the spoken and written language, and to think about constructing pictures and thinking about pictures in terms of structure and grammar and narrative and finding one's voice. So there's really many parallels there between the two disciplines. And then, of course, my upbringing, having grown up as a first-generation immigrant, having spent a lot of time in Mexico as a child, that is also so much part of my DNA that it's really trying to express that immigrant experience in my photographs has really been the bulk of my work and what I have tried to depict in my photographs.
Of course. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know that in your introduction, you said that you are a first-year associate professor, and I would love to hear about how your teaching in particular has influenced your art, and vice versa, as art, like you said, being a dialogue where people can really bring into the conversation their own experiences and their own backgrounds, what that book has looked like for you.
Um, Well, I think first of all that teaching, it provides a community of colleagues and students. And so I feel so fortunate to be surrounded by such an abundance of intellectual curiosity and creativity and enthusiasm on a daily basis. That really is a gift. And at the same time, teaching is also a gift because it allows myself to immerse myself fully in my discipline. I've had to work jobs outside of teaching photography, jobs that have been completely unrelated to photography. And what happens as a result of that is that one's thoughts and energy becomes really divided and fragmented between different preoccupations. Which isn't to say that teaching doesn't do that to an extent. When you teach, you become really invested in your students and their work and progress. So that can be a double-edged sword at times. It can be a source of inspiration, but also a distraction, because one does become so invested in students. So I've had to learn to be really self-disciplined and focused and have a really strong work ethic. The same things that the same values that I try to teach my students. So that's been really kind of lovely to have those things go hand in hand, to teach that, but also to learn that in the process. The other thing I want to say is that I really try not to have my teaching or my artistic practice influence my teaching too explicitly. Of course, I'm bringing my experience and knowledge to the classroom, but I think art is such a personal endeavor, and I understand that I come to it with my own biases and aesthetic tastes and experiences. So if teaching is about generosity, I really do hesitate or try not to exert too much influence on my students in terms of what I like and what I'm interested in. I don't want them to make work that looks like mine. It's more important for them to remind them that photography is a language and that they have to find their own voice. What do they want to say about themselves? What do they want to say about the world? And so it's very personal. And in this regard, I think that teaching constantly reminds me to value my own voice in my work, and vice versa in teaching that as well.
I think you really put that really eloquently. I think that art as a personal endeavor, but kind of balancing that as teaching, which can also be a personal endeavor that you kind of share and find a sense of community through, is really beautiful. And when it comes to your personal portfolio of works, so the Davis mounts a faculty exhibition every 5 years. And how did you choose what to include in Q20 among your portfolio of experiences? How did you kind of curate that for what to present for the exhibit?
Well, thank you so much for including me in the work for the exhibit, first and foremost. Yeah, I feel really fortunate that the timing was perfect. It was work in progress that I'm trying to finish up. So any opportunity to share work is a gift, and not because of the exposure, but because it forces you to make sense of it for yourself and for others. So the work that I'm showing at the Davis has been a long-term project on the American West, as you mentioned, through the perspective of Latinx communities. And it's a mix of older work and newer work that I'm trying to bring to a conclusion. The newest images were made this past summer in agricultural communities that have been revitalized by the immigrant population. And when we think of the American West, this vast sweeping landscapes and the rugged terrain of almost mythical proportions, it served as an inspiration to so many artists and so many writers, but I do think that there's been a lack of representation of Latinx communities. Some of the towns that I photographed, they're 70 to 90% Latinx. So the community there, they're really the heart of these towns. And so in making my decision, it was first that it allowed me to make sense of the work as it's coming to an end, this specific body of work. And I also thought that the work was really timely in that it offers a necessary counterpoint to our contentious discussions around immigration at this point in time, and all the policies that have ensued from that.
Of course, and I would love to know a bit more about particularly your exhibition at which is West. What was the process like? Were you able to interact with your subjects, those being photographed? What was that process like for you? And did you get the chance to interact really intimately with some of the people that you were able to photograph in your exhibit?
Yes, it's a little bit of a combination of a few things. So some of those communities are very close to my hometown in Sacramento. So I grew up in the Central Valley, and I can really relate to immigrant communities, and especially based on agriculture, because Sacramento um, was predominantly based on agriculture for a very long time. My parents came here as when they came here to the United States, they worked as farm workers. Um, so some of these communities, especially in Northern California, are people that I know. And then some of it, like some of the work that I did up in Washington State, Eastern Washington, which is a big apple growing region, might be the largest apple growing region in the United States. I'm sorry, my dogs are about to bark.
No worries.
um, so I had some connections, because it's not a community that I've been there a few times, or a couple of times. Oh, sorry,
No
Coco.
worries.
Those are my chihuahuas, and they're very vocal.
Don't worry, I will be able to edit out anything. So feel free to just talk at your own pace.
Okay. um, and so, I entered this community with an introduction, and then it was a lot of walking around and meeting people and introducing people, and being introduced to people, and explaining what I was doing. And so I ended up spending actually an entire summer last summer finishing this up. And I had the help of a Guggenheim, which was really lovely, because it allowed me to take my partner and my very young child, and they accompanied me throughout the entire trip. So that was great.
Yeah, and I think I think being a shared experience, is something very special. And my next question, I think you were able to touch upon it a tiny bit. About my earlier question about how your teaching practice influences your art, but I would love to know about the different influences you have, perhaps whether that be your students or your family. You talked about how your particular upbringing as from an immigrant family has been very impactful, and I'd love to hear more about the different players you feel have really influenced maybe this particular exhibit or your art form at large.
I think maybe first and foremost, my family, and um, being a child of immigrants. And I have to say that even before my parents, I had grandparents and great grandparents that had come to the United States in search of work. And I was very close to my maternal grandmothers, my grandmother, my great grandmother, who lived in Mexico, and that's why I spent a lot of time in Mexico with them. They were like my second mothers, and just growing up, hearing about the stories of coming to the United States, of being at the border, of working, and having it be really difficult work. I think that sort of legacy of immigration and of unrecognized labor is something that has always it's made an impression on me, and wanting to express that in some way. And then of course there's literature that has influenced me, like people like Sandra Cisneros, Roxanne Dunbar. um, I'm trying to think of other people. There's a really beautiful book, The Rain Gods, and I can't remember the author now. I'm so sorry. But stories about the Mexican and Mexican American experience, um, and You know, I mean, it's really, it's interesting what you draw inspiration from. It kind of changes. And, you know, a lot of the times I would say that maybe that's the foundation of what led me to or compelled me to do this work. But the more that I've met people, I think they really have been the the source of inspiration. You know, having conversations with people, hearing about their lives, and wanting to somehow tell those stories and to have a representation. You know, try to represent them in a way that is respectful and that honors them. You know, when you hear and when you meet them, that's really the thing that that I feel like has propelled the work forward. And then of course there's also like this political moment in time that it just feels like it gives one a sense of urgency about wanting to create work that sort of serves as an antidote to this very hateful sentiment. But did you ask about the influence that my students have on me?
Yes, if you love to hear about that.
Yes, well, they influence me, I think, so much. And I was thinking about this just the other day that they're really a reminder um, to my older self now of my younger self, and you know what that feels like to be just so in love with photography. They remind me to work really hard and work diligently and not to be afraid of failure. And on my best days, I really do think that my students, they renew and they affirm my love of photography, especially the beginning students that see it with a fresh set of eyes and wide-eyed wonder and unadulterated enthusiasm. Um, it's kind of a humbling reminder of how quickly hard work can pay off when you see what they accomplish in a term or a semester. Um, so for me, it's a reminder to not make excuses, to work and focus. Um, and of course, every semester, every term is very different. But any advice that I give to my students is advice that I have to give to myself. So it's kind of a really lovely symmetry that happens there as I'm teaching them, because they do teach me as well. They remind me. They remind me at my core of why I wanted to do this.
And how has maybe this evolved or looked like, especially during COVID and when we all had to transition to, at-home teaching? What was that process like for you? And did that change or help you think about kind of your teaching style and maybe this relationship with your students and vice versa in a different way?
I think if anything, it's really strengthened um, the relationship or the bond that I have with my students, because it feels like we're all in this together. I'm learning to be a professor that teaches online. There's no playbook for this. And so it's just amazing how generous my students have been with me. And, you know, that's always something that I really try to foster in the classroom is generosity and empathy and compassion towards ourselves and others. And so I've just been really just so grateful to see my students really value the same things. You know, like I feel like they're gonna be okay in this world. You know, and they're gonna be photographers. They're gonna be interesting photographers, but really just interesting human beings. And um, you know, I think the conversations that we've had around this particular moment in time has also been really interesting, because of the pandemic and sort of everything else around it, and being at home and being confronted with a lot of these different pressures and anxieties. I think it's made the conversations very, very real. Um, and yeah, I feel so grateful to have students that are so open.
It definitely is a really beautiful thing to have a medium like photography to, I think, really think through and to have and to work through, especially at this time. And I would love to ask what does that look for your art practice now? And if you could speak about any projects that you're currently working on, whether they're in the works or kind of inspirations that you're excited or you have at this time, I would love to hear. I would love to hear about them.
Well, unfortunately, I my Guggenheim was cut a little bit short because I was on a Guggenheim last academic year, and so there was a lot of going out that did not occur. Photographing people and out in communities. I was supposed to photograph more in the spring and in the summer, and be out west, and that didn't happen. So I've had to really sort of hunker down, and right now I'm just really working on editing and sequencing and trying to bring projects to an end. I have 3 chapters of this sort of long-term body of work on Latinx immigrant culture, Verdant Land, West, and Dulce. And these are projects that I've been working on for almost a decade. They're all interrelated and they build off of one another. So right now I'm just sort of, I have the task of making sense of the work and bringing it to its conclusion. And I hope to do that by making handmade artist books the way that I did with Verdant Land as a form of closure. So it's really a lot of color correcting and editing and sequencing, making book dummies, a lot of studio work. And I think right now the other thing that that's on my mind is thinking about motherhood and what it means to be a parent to a young child and to a girl, and bringing them up in this world and what this world might look like in 20, 30, 40 years. So that's been on my mind a lot, and I'm trying to make pictures that convey that sense of anxiety, but also the joy of being a parent.
And maybe this is I would love to hear about what this process looks like, especially with the latter project, as you're kind of thinking through these ideas of motherhood and what that looks like right now. What is your process for doing that? Does it usually start with trying to get as many photographs as you can at the outset, or perhaps doing a lot of reading and compiling of work that maybe has been done previously or that has previously inspired you?
So a lot of it has been sort of anecdotal, and talking to my friends who have had children and thinking about how motherhood is represented traditionally and how far from the reality that is. There was a really great essay that a friend forwarded me, and I'm sorry, my brain is just so mushy these days being online so much, but it was basically about the death of motherhood and how brutal it is, the process of laboring, and we have these romanticized ideas of motherhood, and sometimes it's really far from that. And so that's kind of been like my main source of inspiration, is like thinking about how do I tell this story from a perspective that isn't like the Madonna and Child, like this sort of idealized, romanticized male gaze of motherhood. That motherhood is messy, parenthood is messy, the birthing process is brutal. Um, of course, there's a lot of joy in that, but there's a lot of anxiety, and so looking at historical examples of how that's been represented and then trying to build something different from that, kind of playing off of that. So that's how I'm approaching it right now. And I also have a friend who is a photographer. Her name is Rose Jerome, and she did a very similar project. So it's been really interesting to kind of talk to her about photographing herself and her young daughter. I think for me, it's a very personal thing, and I just hope that one day it's probably not work that I'm going to share, but it might be something that I can pass on to my daughter when she gets to a certain age, thinking about writing her letter every year. Um, every year has been so different.
Or
There's just, or so much has happened every year. So, if I write her a letter a year, what will that be like in the trajectory of 18 years?
of course, and
Um,
I think that really circles back really well to what you talked about earlier in our call, which is about, your art as this personal experience, as something that is kind of constantly informing both perhaps community and teaching as a photography as a community exercise, but then also as a very personal medium to be able to think through how do I understand this lived memory, and especially these very real, sometimes messy experiences through that. So thank you so much, Kathya. Those are all of the questions that I have for you today, but thank you so much again for sharing with us about your work and also about your practice. For all of you that are tuning into our interview, please go ahead and check out Kathya Landeros' exhibit in the Davis Museum's Q20 exhibit. And
oh, no.
thank you so much again. Kathya, do you have any last words before we wrap up? Please feel free.
Um, well, just stay safe, stay healthy, happy as much as one can
Yeah.
be. Thank you so much, Gabby. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much as well, Kathya. And to everyone watching, have a great day and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.